My name is Emily Carter. I am 32 years old. I still remember the exact words. My mother said them at my cousin's engagement party, in front of 20 relatives. Emily is the disappointment of this family, she said, laughing like it was a joke. But we love her anyway. Everyone chuckled. My aunt patted my shoulder like I needed comforting. I smiled. I said nothing. I picked up my drink and walked toward the balcony. That sentence followed me for 6 years. Let me back up. I grew up in a house where my older brother Marcus was the standard, and I was the warning. Marcus made honor roll, my parents took him out for steak dinners. I made honor roll too, most years, but nobody noticed. It was expected of Marcus. From me, it was just normal. Not worth mentioning. Marcus went to a well-known university on a partial scholarship. My parents drove him there themselves, cried in the parking lot, took photos. I got into a smaller state school. Nobody drove me. I took the train alone, with 2 suitcases and a box of books. Marcus studied finance. I studied computer science, a decision my father called a strange choice for a girl who should be thinking about something more practical. Marcus graduated and got a job at a mid-sized firm. There was a party. My mother wore a new dress for the occasion. I graduated a year later, top of my class in my program. Nobody mentioned it at family dinner. My mother spent the whole evening asking Marcus about his new apartment. I started working as a junior developer. Long hours, low pay, but I was learning fast. On weekends, I began sketching out an idea, a small app to help freelancers track invoices and payments automatically. Something I built out of my own frustration, after chasing down late client payments one too many times. I mentioned it once at dinner. My father barely looked up from his plate. That's cute, he said. But you should focus on finding something stable. Maybe Marcus can get you an interview at his firm. I never brought it up again. For 4 years, I built quietly. Nights. Weekends. Holidays, sometimes, when everyone else was celebrating with family, I was debugging code alone in my apartment with cold pizza and 3 monitors. The app grew slowly, then quickly. Freelancers loved it. Then small agencies started using it. Then a mid-sized accounting software company took notice. I never told my family how it was growing. What was the point? I had already learned, by then, exactly what they thought of me. Marcus, meanwhile, kept climbing at his firm. New promotions. New title. A wedding, eventually, with an open bar and a live band. My mother cried happy tears through the entire ceremony. I sat at the family table, alone, smiling politely, while distant relatives asked me, again, if I had figured out what I wanted to do with my life yet. I'm working on something, I always said. That's nice, sweetie, was always the response, before the conversation moved back to Marcus. By the time I was 29, my company had built a real customer base. Real revenue. A software conglomerate began quiet conversations about acquiring us. I still hadn't told my family a single thing. At that same year's Thanksgiving, my mother made her comment about disappointment. My father nodded along. Marcus laughed the loudest. I looked around that table and made a decision. I would let them believe whatever they wanted. I would never correct the story again. I would just keep building, quietly, and for myself. The acquisition offer came formally the following year. $9 million. I sat in my lawyer's office, staring at the number, thinking about every "that's cute" and every "figure out what you want to do with your life" comment I'd absorbed for a decade. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Marcus. I called my 2 co-founders instead, and we celebrated quietly with dinner at a small restaurant none of them had ever heard of. I thought, briefly, about telling my family. I imagined my mother's reaction, the surprise, followed almost immediately by some comment that would somehow bring the conversation back to Marcus. I decided against it. Not out of anger. Out of self-protection. For the first time in my life, I had something entirely mine. I didn't want it measured, minimized, or compared to my brother's achievements before I'd even had a chance to enjoy it myself. So I said nothing. The deal closed 4 months later. $9 million, after taxes, landed in my account. I didn't change my lifestyle dramatically. I paid off my student loans. I bought a modest condo. I kept consulting quietly, on my own terms, choosing projects I actually cared about. Family dinners continued as normal. Marcus bought a bigger house. Everyone gathered around photos of his new kitchen. "What about you, Emily?" my mother asked once, almost as an afterthought. "Still doing your little computer thing?" "Something like that," I said. She nodded and turned back to Marcus's kitchen photos. This is where the quiet revenge began, though at the time, it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like boundaries. I stopped correcting my mother when she introduced me to new people as if my daughter, she does something with computers, and my son Marcus, he's a director at his firm now. I let it stand. I stopped attending every family gathering, citing work. Which was true, I was quietly starting a second venture, using the reputation and capital I'd built, this time with a confidence I hadn't fully owned before. Marcus, for his part, had no idea. He'd call occasionally, mostly to talk about his promotions, his new car, his kids' private school tuition. Once, he said, half joking, "Must be nice not having real financial pressure, Em. You don't even have a family to support." I let that pass too. A year later, Marcus's firm went through restructuring. He kept his job, but his bonus shrank. He mentioned it at dinner, complaining about tuition costs and mortgage payments. My mother turned to me. "You don't have these problems, do you? Simple life." "Something like that," I said again. Nobody asked what my actual finances looked like. They had already decided the story of my life years ago. I simply let them keep reading it. 18 months after the sale, my father had a minor stroke. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to bring the family together in a tense, frightened week. Medical costs piled up beyond what insurance covered. My mother mentioned, quietly, that they might need to use retirement savings to cover the gap. Marcus offered $3,000. He announced it at the hospital like a grand gesture. My mother hugged him, told him what a good son he was. I offered to help too, privately, to my mother alone. "That's all right, sweetie," she said, patting my hand. "I know things are probably tight for you. Marcus has it handled." I said nothing. The following week, I paid the remaining balance directly to the hospital, anonymously, through their billing office. $11,000. Nobody in my family ever knew it was me. I didn't do it to be discovered. I did it because it was right, and because for the first time, I had the means to do it without needing anyone's permission. Around this time, I quietly started a second company, a consulting practice advising other founders on scaling freelance-focused software. Within a year, it was profitable too. Marcus, meanwhile, began struggling more than he let on. Restructuring hit his firm again. His bonus shrank further. The new house, the private school tuition, the leased car, all of it strained against a tightening budget. He never mentioned this outright at dinner. He kept up appearances. New golf clubs. A vacation photo here and there. My mother kept praising him regardless, oblivious to the cracks underneath. I watched from a careful distance. Not gloating. Just observing. One evening, my mother called, uncharacteristically, just to talk. She mentioned that Marcus and his wife were going through some financial adjustments, but assured me it was nothing serious. "He's smart, he'll land on his feet." I said nothing about the $11,000 I'd quietly paid for my father's hospital bill. I said nothing about the $9 million sitting, carefully invested, in accounts they didn't know existed. "I'm sure he will," I said simply. That was the year I stopped needing their validation entirely. Not from bitterness, from clarity. I had built something real, without their belief in me, and that made it feel more mine, not less. But something was coming that would break the silence, not because I planned it, but because truth, eventually, finds its way into the light. The truth came out through an industry podcast. A well-known tech interview show featured me as a guest, discussing the sale of my company and what it taught me about building quietly, without outside validation. My cousin heard the episode first. She shared it in the family group chat with a string of shocked emoji. My phone started ringing within the hour. My mother's voice, when I answered, wavered between disbelief and confusion. "Emily. Is this true? $9 million? Why didn't you tell us?" I kept my voice steady. "It's true. But, all this time we thought you were just..." "I know what you thought," I said. Calm. Not angry. Just factual. A long pause followed. Marcus called an hour later, his tone sharp, almost accusatory, as though I'd wronged him by staying quiet. $9 million, Emily? And you let us think you were struggling? Do you know the year I've had? I could have used. Could have used what, Marcus? I asked, still calm. My money? My help? You never asked. You just assumed I had less than you. Silence. I paid Dad's remaining hospital bill last year, I said. Anonymously. Because Mom said you had it handled. I didn't need credit. I just didn't want him carrying that debt. Long, heavy silence on his end. My mother, in a separate call that same week, tried a softer approach. We didn't know, sweetie. If we'd known, we would have treated you differently. We would have been so proud. That sentence landed harder than any insult ever had. You shouldn't need a number to be proud of me, I said. You had 32 years to be proud of me for other reasons. You chose not to be. She had no answer. The family dinner that followed, 2 weeks later, felt different. Marcus barely spoke. My mother kept glancing at me like she was meeting someone new. My father, still recovering, mostly listened, watching the family navigate this new information. At one point, Marcus muttered, "I guess you win." This was never a competition to me, I said. It was only ever one to you. Nobody responded to that. In the months that followed, things shifted slowly, imperfectly, the way real change usually does. My mother started asking real questions about my work. Actual curiosity, not performance. It felt strange, being seen this way after 32 years of being background noise in my own family's story. Marcus and I eventually had one honest conversation, without an audience. He admitted, quietly, that he'd spent years needing to be the successful one, because it was the only thing that made him feel secure in our family. I accepted his apology, in my own way. I didn't buy anyone's forgiveness. I didn't need to prove anything further. The $9 million was never really the point. The point was that I had built something real, entirely on my own terms, without needing anyone's permission to make it valid. My father, during one of our quieter conversations afterward, said something I still think about. I was wrong, he said. Calling you the disappointment. I was measuring you by the wrong things. It's okay, Dad, I said. And I meant it, not because it didn't hurt, but because I'd already stopped needing him to say it. Here is what I want you to take from this: if you've ever been the quiet one in your family, the one overlooked, underestimated, compared unfavorably to a sibling who got all the applause, you do not owe anyone a running commentary on your success. You do not need to announce your worth to people who already decided, long ago, what your worth was. Build quietly, if that protects your peace. Let your work speak, eventually, on its own terms. And when the truth comes out, because it usually does, you won't need to gloat. You'll simply stand there, calm, dignified, exactly as you always were. The people who doubted you were never really watching closely enough to see you coming.